Okay, everyone. I think we're ready to start. If people are late, they can just join. Welcome to this session. My name is Đorđe. You know, if we met, I'm a very old debater. One can call me a dino, I guess. We're gonna talk about first speeches today. I've divided this whole session into two parts, which is first speeches on top half and then first speeches on bottom half. Though most of the things I'll be talking about are applicable to both, so it's not a strict division or anything. I just felt it has, more sense to do it that way. But most of the things I'll be talking about, you can use wherever you are, whichever position you are in general. If you have any questions during this session, please feel free to ask. We'll have a 15-minute, I believe, Q&A at the end. But if you come up with something during my session, please just unmute yourselves and ask whatever you have. That's also fine. So first speeches on top half, we're going to start with that. There's a couple of things that I always take into account that I think are very important if you are a first speaker. What I always start my speech with on top half is something that people have, unfortunately, I think, forgotten about a bit, which is a cool or funny or some other kind of introduction. People will start their speech with, I have 3 arguments from opening government or whatever, which is always boring and never gets the attention that you want. I always start with some kind of an introduction that I'm sure is going to cause the judge to be fully focused on what I have to say. And what I run in this introduction really depends on the debate we're having. If we're talking about something serious, something, scary or those kinds of things, I always try to be emotional, serious, sort of an actor kind of a thing, right? This is all kind of a theatrical thing as the entire debating is. So I always try to be serious or emotional, just to make sure that people in the audience or judges are like, wow, this is something serious. This is what this debate should be about. And this is very important as a speech. While on the other hand, if debate is about something fun or open, those kinds of things, I try to be funny, I try to run jokes, those kinds of things. Now, sometimes this might sound a bit cringe, I know, but I'm sure it gets the attention of the judge in your direction, and this is something that's very important. What I've done back in my day is I've tried to memorize as many cool opening lines from different parts of life. So I've memorized quotes from movies or lyrics to songs that people know, and I usually put them as first sentences of my speech. I always start this way, and I never start with just the boring free arguments in the speech and that kind of a thing. What this does is this gets the attention your way. This is also important on back half as well. Notice that when the back half starts, it's been half an hour of debating already. Judges' focus is probably pretty low, especially if it's like around 3 or 4. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that they're listening, and you want to grab their attention by starting seriously with a serious note or funny, by running a joke or those kinds of things. When you crack a joke, people are always likely to listen to you more. So always start with this. I think this is something that people have forgot because we live in this new debating meta where people try to run 5 arguments and then to save time they just start with analyzing from the very get-go. I never start with this, and I feel like opening lines are very, very important to get those speeches going. So my advice here is try to look into quotes, try to look into lyrics to songs, whatever you feel like might be something. I used to have a list of all of those things, and then and it doesn't necessarily have to be entirely connected to the motion, right? Just a couple of words or those kinds of things is something that's enough in order to get this attention your way. The second thing I focus on is during my prep time. So whenever I'm top half, but especially opening government, I never use the entire 15 minutes to run my arguments on papers and talk to my partner. I always spend like 3 minutes at least reading my papers. And I think this is very, very important. I know it's a bit suboptimal because you don't have enough time, to write everything. And then, you might miss something, or you might have a little less reasons for a certain argument. But I still think it's more important to, read the entire thing, read all your papers that you have, and make sure that you know the speech almost as if you didn't have the papers and you had to give it, from the top of your head. This is important because if you start to stutter during your speech, or you're unsure what goes next, or you cannot read the words you've written on your paper, given stress, given sometimes the audience, all those things. Judges necessarily feel like you're insecure and that you don't necessarily believe in your case as well. Now, this is obviously, they don't actively think about this in this particular way, but whenever someone is stuttering, or kind of finds it hard to find words, or is making big pauses in their speech to read their papers, this looks a bit less serious. So what I do is I always read my papers first few minutes, like last few minutes of my prep time. I'll always go through my speech. While this is happening, I let my partner think more about the motion, more about certain frames that we can run. So they're not just wasting time there. They're thinking about the analysis, and they'll tell me later. But I always take a me time in this prep. And I always spend like 2 or 3 minutes to go through my entire papers, to know what I'm going to be talking about. And I find this very important in general. Now, another thing which I've noticed people do, more often, I would say, nowadays, is they when they start their speech, especially from opening government, they have some kinds of preemptive responses to op bench from the get-go. This is very reasonable, and the reason for this is opening government as a position is a bit suboptimal, right? Because you only have one responsive speech, which is different to all other positions, because everybody has 2 responsive speeches in all those 3 other positions. Now, what I personally do is I look into the draw, and whenever draw is out at a competition, I always talk to my partner about the draw as well. So we try to analyze the draw and see who we are with, and then see who's the biggest possible threat. If we realize that the biggest threat is anybody on the op bench, I always have preemptive responses to the most basic op argument. This way we have engagement with the opposition bench from the very start of our speech. But if I, for example, realize that closing government might be the strongest team, I never go with the preemptive. I always try to run more arguments instead. So I have no responses, but I'll run 3 arguments, so they have to struggle with extension. So I would generally say something that I've noticed is very popular nowadays is this preemptive responsiveness to, framings from opening government from the beginning of the speech. I sometimes do this, but I think it's a strategic question, right? So if you feel like this is going to help you because oppositions are very strong and you want to have a direct engagement from the very start, then I would say go for it. But if you feel like you need to run more arguments, so I always have this, these couple of minutes when the draw is out until the motion is released. I always talk to my partner about the draw. I always analyze teams, look at how many points they have, whether I know them or not, and then see, who our biggest threat is and how should we position ourselves in that debate. This also, applies to POIs I'll be taking, all those things. So people will tell you that you have to take a POI from, a diagonal, or if you're opening from closing. I always take a POI from the strongest team, and those things. So this strategy in who you're with in the room is also pretty important, and I always focus on this. And this is something that I take into account when thinking about preemptive responses or frames that I'll be running. Sometimes it's smarter just to have like 3 or 4 arguments in opening government with no responses to opposition, because this means the closing government will have to, struggle with their extension, which strategically might be the best possible tactic. While we're at it, from opening teams in general, from OG or OO, I always have at least 2 arguments. Generally, I tend to run 3. Now, obviously, the way I position this is the first 2 I usually run well. The third, I only give a couple of reasons because, time constraints and all of that. But I always try to run. Unfortunately, we live in these fast debating times when people will run 100 arguments, and then this is the reason why, back half teams are sometimes struggling, and statistically speaking, top half is the best possible position to be in. So I will never run 1 argument. I will always run at least 2, and sometimes even 3, because I think that this at least means that you win over your closing, which is sometimes pretty important. And then you just focus on one other team and you're through, if we're talking about the uprounds. So I never run only 1 argument. I've seen people sometimes do it because they're, either slow speakers or they want to run this 1 argument well. I think you can do both. You don't have to opt for only one. When it comes to running my arguments in general, I mean, I won't be spending too much time on explaining how to run arguments or make analysis because
in first.
So if I run I hope this is the question, right? If I have any framing that, implicitly is against the op teams, I will always flag why is it against op teams. I've seen recently people running framing in debating without telling judges why this framing matters. Sometimes I know that you feel like it's obvious, but trust me, loads of judges will not get it. So if I run a preemptive, or if I run a framing, or if I run a weighing, I always tend to explain why this matters and why this specifically goes against the opposition team or any other team I'd try to go against. So if I opt for this option, I will always spend 10 or 15 more seconds to explain to a judge why this matters. Unfortunately, loads of judges will not get your framing or why that framing matters, especially because framing is usually positioned at the very beginning of your speech. And until the end of your speech, they forgot all about it, right? So, and it's very, very hard for a judge to, have to run for the entire case, but then take into account your framings. It's easier for them to just discard the framing and go for the arguments in that, deliberation time. So I generally always try to, explain very explicitly, very directly what my framing does to this debate and to the opposition arguments. I think this dumbs it down sometimes, but it's very important to make sure that all the judges in the panel get what you're trying to say with that particular framing. I hope this makes sense. If it was a different question, sorry, go again, I guess.
No, that's good. Thank you so much.
All right, no worries. So let's get back to the analyzing stuff. And if you have other questions, just feel free to shoot. When I run my arguments, even though I won't be spending too much time today explaining how to run analysis on arguments, those things, I always try to have at least like 3 or 4 lines of, analysis why certain things happen. When I do this, between me and you, sometimes these reasons are similar, or I don't want to say same, but similar one to another. I still opt for running all of them. What I do is I just divide them, right? So I take one thing that is similar to another as reason number 1, and then the other thing is reason number 4. By the time you are at number 4, people forgot what number 1 was. They just remember you have 4 reasons. And this trick I pretty much always use. No better judges will tell you that, you told me you had 5 reasons, you actually had 3. But there's no harm in that, right? At least you had 3. So always run more, even though some of them might sound similar. I just kind of hide it in plain sight by pretending that they are, divided. That's something I always generally go for. When analyzing things, this is pretty important, even though it's pretty simple. I always name the reasons. So I always give a number to a reason, right? I say I have 4 reasons for this argument. Reason number 1 is this. Reason number 2 is this. I never go for the old school additionally, and I never run it as like a story. I always give number to each reason. The reason for this is when it comes to deliberation, people will, so a judge will, a chair will ask a wing, how did they prove this argument? And the wing will say, oh, they have 4 reasons for this. This is reason number 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. And, I've noticed that people, even, people that are, longer in debating kind of miss this, and they just go through reasons, but they never number them. They just tell it as a story, or it runs, and then the problem is some of those are generally missed by judges. They still feel like the argument is proven, but it's much better both for speakers that you're going to get, but also, in order to make sure that judge got all of that, to number all of them by saying, this is reason number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And then people will then say, oh, this guy has 4 reasons for this argument, which is pretty good. Now, in general, when I finish up my speech on top half, I also use the trick from the beginning, which is that I always have this ending sentence, so end quote as well. Now, time-wise, sometimes people will have to go for, because of all of these reasons, vote for opening opposition or whatever, which I guess is fine if you're really running out of time. But I always try to leave at least 5 or 10 seconds, which from my experience will never, give you enough time to run anything smart or debate winning. So always use this to give them another quote or to, give some kind of an ending sentence that remains in people's brains after your speech is done. I think this is more effective than, running another reason for something or, whatever impacts to some arguments. So always at the end of the speech, I always leave at least 10 seconds to go through another quote, another sentence. And this is especially important if debates are about something serious, something emotional, because then people will be like, oh, they have the feeling that this is so important that your case is something that changes the entire debate. So, debating, especially as a first speaker, is very theatrical. You have to, pretend that you're an actor and trying to sell a story to someone. So use all the tricks that you can. It's not only about proving an argument, it's also how you present yourself. It's also about your, body language and how you, whether you seem like you're secure or sure about your case, or whether you seem like you're stuttering or unsure what you're running. All those things. So everything from the very moment you enter debate, everything matters. This is why I tend to also like jump to POIs. I'll use the word aggressive, even though it might not be the best word when it comes to engaging with other teams. Even though I have a stupid POI, the reason is I just want to make sure the judge sees that I'm engaging and willing to fight, because when you just grab a phone after your speech has ended, you send the message that you don't really care about this. So it's fine if they give you a 4 if you won't fight for it, and this is problematic, right? So it's really
quick
just
question.
Yes, sure.
Why do you think that the performative aspects and being theatrical is more important on first speeches than on second speeches?
I mean, it isn't necessarily more important. I think the second speeches are more technical in nature because you use, the different kinds of tricks to make sure that the judge understands why you beat other teams on technical perspectives, while the first speech is something that is you presenting your case. So if you fail at presenting your case, I don't feel like the second speaker can help. They might be the best second speaker ever, but if you failed at presenting that case, at selling that case, unfortunately, I think there's not much a second speaker can do. While on the other hand, if you sold it well in your first speech, obviously having a good second speaker is very important, but you can still win even without that. So I feel like if you sell the story to a person that is judging, that is giving you scores, it's very important to use all the aspects rather than only, technical debating stuff like having many reasons for something or having arguments. I also try to have all the other aspects to make sure that they get my story and that I've managed to sell a product to them, basically. And I feel like the first speaker is the person selling it. This is especially true for back half, right? Because if you don't sell it at that point, even technically speaking, your second speaker cannot do anything. On top half, this is not the same, right? They can run another argument if you fail to do so. But I feel like selling the story from the first speaker is very, very important. And generally, when it comes to deliberation, chairs will ask, wings, what your case was. They will only talk about the first speaker. Now, when it comes to comparing teams, they'll use the second speaker as well. But when someone asks what was OO's case, they'll only say what the first speaker said, right? They'll say, oh, they had 3 arguments. All 3 of them were present in the first speech. So if you manage to, to persuade them into believing that you win with these or that these are very important, then you win the debate. So this is so getting back to the ending of the speech. I also find that people became a bit boring with because of all of these reasons, whatever. I think you should also try to be smart when it comes to ending your speech as well. So, being emotional or funny again, in order to be memorable to the judge. Now, obviously, none of these things will win you the debate. You have to have arguments, and all the other technical aspects of winning a debate in order to win. That's fair enough. But I feel like these little things make the difference when it's close. give you better speaker points. All of these things are important. So another thing is when I'm opening opposition, I will never listen to the full prime minister. I will only listen to like first 3 minutes of the prime minister, and then I'll focus. And this is why I feel like opening opposition is the strongest position, because you have just more time to run whatever, you know, have more time to read your case, to, you know, add things that you feel are lacking in the prep time. So I always listen only to like first 3 minutes of that PM speech. The reason is, first of all, I'd much rather have more time to read through my speech than, you know, come up with an unbelievably smart response to that entire case there. Additionally, I feel like people from like opening government especially will run their most important arguments in the beginning minutes and then leave the you know, less important ones, or the ones that are generally they're less sure of, for the end of their speech, right? So I'll hear the most important argument, and if I feel like I want to respond, I'll respond. If not, I'll just run my case. I'm generally a person who doesn't respond a lot at all, because I'm always a first speaker and I almost never respond to stuff. Now, this depends, right? Sometimes I have a short rebuttal, sometimes I have a short weighing, but I generally don't focus on this as much. And this is a different school of thought. I guess some people will tell you that you have to respond a lot. Some will tell you you have to respond to some extent. I generally tend to leave this to another person. The reason is my second speaker is a second speaker for a reason. They have, especially when we're top half, right? They have one team to compare, one team to respond to. They have 7 minutes and 15 seconds to respond to them. I really don't see the point in responding from the first speaker as much. Now, you can obviously point out some big logical mistakes, or, you know, some the rebuttal that is short but effective. This is fair enough, but I never spend too much time on it. I'm more focused on making sure that I run all my things. So I generally tend to run more arguments as opposed to less arguments with more responsiveness. And this, don't take it for like this isn't written in a stone. You know, it just depends how you prefer to you know, do your speeches. Some first speakers, better than me even, will tell you that they actually respond a lot. I genuinely, this is both because I'm not a great responsive speaker at all, but also because I feel like my job is to run an argument and to make sure that they got these arguments and that they're bought as analyzed and proven. And then I have another person which is going to respond. You know, this is especially true for opening half when you have one team to compare with. It's not rocket science, so they can deal for an entire speech with one team. I don't really see the point of you know, leader of the opposition responding to opening government, especially because loads of your arguments will directly respond to theirs. But then if you're opting for this, make sure to point out during your speech, how do you respond to opening government? This is why listening to the first 3 or 4 minutes is important, because you can always point out how you, you know, directly respond with your arguments. The rest of this PM speech from opening opposition, I will use to run through my arguments, to read, you know, and when you get that first reading through, you will notice that you're lacking certain things. So you will notice that you lack analysis at certain points. You will notice that you know, lack framing, or you know, something is a bit illogical. So reading through your papers is incredibly important and really makes a world of difference, because as an experienced debater especially, you will notice what you're missing, which, you know, during the prep time where there's stress and, you know, time is running out, you usually miss. And this is where I fill loads of my arguments during that PM speech. So I really tend to not listen as much. I listen only to the beginnings, like the first 3 minutes, and then I focus on my things as well. I also use, especially as a prime minister, but also leader of the opposition, I also use all of the introduction time, all of the getting into you know, the room time. I let my partner introduce ourselves, you know, all those protocols that are now, you know, that people are now doing. I just focus completely on my papers and I let them deal with this. This is additional like 2 or 3 minutes sometimes of your time. I also now, you know, people wanted to change the debating manual in order to shorten the time people have before they start their speech by limiting it to 1 minute. Now everybody is exploiting this by saying, oh, I will use my entire minute now. And, you know, genuinely speaking, I always do that as well. Like, I don't use an entire minute, but I'll like use 30 seconds to make sure my paper's are in order, to make sure I know what to start with. And I especially go through my first entering sentence multiple times, because if you stutter there, you kind of you know, ruined your entire speech because you seem insecure. So I always start with this first sentence. I make sure that I get every word, that I don't, you know, sometimes, you know, misread something or those kinds of things. Additional thing, I guess the final thing on top half, at least, is I'm always very open with my partner when it comes to how I feel about my speech when I get back to my seat. So I never try to hide, you know, that I didn't necessarily feel like the judge understood what the case was, or, you know, feel like they didn't buy that last argument. So I always tell them, look, these two arguments, I ran them, that's fine. But this third one, I didn't have enough time, so maybe try to focus on this as well. So I always have this like a 10-second window before another person starts speaking, where I, you know, use this time to strategically talk to my partner and say, I feel like this argument might be a bit lacking. We need a comparative here, for example. Try to think of that and add this in your speech. Now, obviously, they have other things to talk, you know, to think about. They are all stressed, all these sorts of things. But if you feel like something did not go as planned, it's better to be open and to tell them what you generally feel like was missing, and that they can add certain things, rather than, you know, not saying anything, taking your phone and, you know, thinking about other things, because this sends a message that you're not really willing to fight in that room. So the way I structure my speech from any position, specifically speaking, is I always start with the opening line, as I've already discussed, something, you know, that's not like longer than 10 or 15 seconds, but it's short to get all the attention, you know, to make this energy in the room serious or funny or whatever I'm trying to achieve with this. Then I always name what my arguments are going to be. I say I have 3 arguments in this speech. The first one is going to be this, the second is going to be this, and the third one is going to be this. The reason I do this at the beginning of my speech is I feel like this is used for clarity, right? I feel like when you name arguments that way at the beginning, judges are more likely to be, you know, to understand what the case in general was and what you're trying to prove. They're just waiting for you to prove those arguments, but they're expecting them, right? So this encourages closing team to run any of those arguments, because they listen to the beginning of your speech and they're like, they're gonna run this, so we're gonna discard it, right? So I always name what my arguments are going to be. Then if I have a framing or I have a preemption, which is something we've discussed previously, then is the time to do that. I never spend too much time on this, especially if I have like 2 or 3 arguments. You know, other people will tell you different things. From my personal opinion, I genuinely never do that. Like, very rarely do this longer than like a minute or minute and a half. And then I go on to my arguments. I try to be as explicit there. So I start with a statement. I tell them that I have, say, 4 reasons for something or 5 reasons for something. And then I number all of those reasons as I go through my speech. So I say, the first reason is this. The second reason is this, this, and this. The third reason, and so on. Then I give impacts of that argument. And finally, a very important thing, which a lot of people are forgetting nowadays, which is the comparative to that argument. So why this argument is comparatively something that is important. I also give a couple of reasons for this as well. So my comparatives are never just one sentence. They're also, here's why this argument is comparative. There's 3 reasons for this. And I also number them. So reason number 1, reason number 2, reason number 3. And then I run all my arguments this way. And at the very end of my speech, I have this one sentence that ends the speech in a, you know, note that I want to end it with. So either a serious one or a funny one. I obviously don't use the same quote on the as the beginning, but, you know, I think about, or you know, at the end, you can just repeat some of the, you know, explicit quotes from your speech, just to make sure that the energy is right. So this is how I structure my speech every time I'm a first speaker, and it never. I don't think this is wrong ever. I mean, you may lose the debate, fair enough, but I think that the structure of the speech is very, very important. And really gets the job done. Judges are looking for a clear, easy to follow speech. I am sure that they will give you a higher spot than someone who is messy. They want you to make their life as easy as possible. The only way for you to do this as a first speaker is to have a clear speech where they can easily follow all of the reasons, all of the arguments, make sure what in each second you're trying to say or prove. This is something that is so super important, both from top half and bottom half. So I always structure it this way. Beginning statement, naming my arguments, possibly some kind of a response, and then argument number one, statement, 4 reasons or 5 reasons, however much you have, naming all of those and numbering all of those, impacts, comparatives, and then the ending statement as well. This is how I structure my speech. Those who know me better know that I generally don't take as much POIs, but don't tell anyone I told you this. This is being recorded, so I guess people got it now. But take a POI somewhere along the lines there. This is what I generally do on top half. When it comes to back half, most of these things apply as well. I just feel like there are a couple of specific things to the back half as opposed to the top half. So what back half needs to do, what back half first speaker needs to do, is they need to step up when it comes to introductions. This is even more important now. The reason is, firstly, there's been half an hour or 40 minutes of debating before you came, and judges are tired, their focus is off. You want to grab that attention. If you're boring and you speak in a kind of a same tone and don't really have anything entertaining, it's very easy for them to just doze off and don't necessarily listen to your entire speech. I mean, they'll listen, right? But they won't put the energy in it. They won't put the focus in that speech. So what I always do is I try to start the speech strong by either having another sentence that is something that is emotional or whatever, or by explicitly saying what is the problem with the top half. Now, most people do this. I guess this is not novel to most of you, but in general, I always try to, and this is where I'll spend more time than with the beginning statement from top half. I'll spend like 30 seconds if needed, but I want to make sure that the judge understands what was lacking on that top half and how will I fill this top half, because look, I mean, when you're like a closing government, the easiest thing for a judge ever is to say that you don't have an extension and that they don't really see why your extension is important or, beats top half. It's very easy to just use the quote, oh, you don't have an extension, or I don't see why this extension matters. So you need to make sure that they get why it matters from the very get-go of your speech. Even if you have like arguments that are new, this still doesn't mean that you win, because you need to explain why you beat your opening, right? And the best possible way to do this is by starting the speech by saying, here are the reasons why we feel like top half is losing and why what we're going to bring to the table is going to change the entire debate. And we are going to be winning because of this, right? So I always, if you have, completely new arguments that it's easy for judge to understand that these arguments beat top half, you don't have to compare. You can just run another sentence once again. But if they had good arguments and you need to, make sure that they understand where you come in as a closing half team, always start with, prioritizing your speech by weighing this, your argument, your future arguments with what top half was saying. So I generally feel like this is very, very important. Now, most speakers will do this anyway. This is, I guess, not novel, but still very, very important to go through. On the other hand, so when I have my prep time and I'm closing, I have a different prep time. Both of us just sit there and come up with the biggest possible number of arguments that we can potentially run. So we have one paper. This is one paper for both speakers. When we get to the room, this paper is sitting at the middle in the middle of the table, so both of us can see it clearly. When we have like 5, 6 arguments that are the potential extension that we're going to run. So our entire prep time is focused on just finding as many arguments as possible to make sure that we will have some extension. And then we both very carefully listen to what the top half is saying, discarding arguments that we feel like they've covered, and then decide together what is going to be our extension. However, one of the speakers on bottom half is going to have to be the captain and decide which arguments you're going to be running at the end of the day. I generally feel like this should be the first speaker. The reason is the first speaker is going to be running these arguments. So if you as the first speaker don't feel as if some arguments will work, or you're not sure of them, or you don't know how to prove them, I would say you take the gamble and say what you're going to run as an extension, if you cannot come to the conclusion with your partner. Now, obviously, try to negotiate with them, but if you cannot come to a conclusion, I feel like you have the responsibility of choosing particular arguments. And then if you're wrong, I guess this is part of the game, right? But the reason is you are going to be running these arguments. So if you're unsure of some of them, even if your partner feels like they're great, if you just don't know how to run them, you've wasted your time. You're going to lose the debate. So in that case, I genuinely go for I make the cut at one point, right? So we both discuss, and if we agree, we agree. But if we don't, I say we're going to be running these 2 arguments as our extension in general, right? But I never, obviously, I never run my arguments in prep time. What I do as a first speaker is I listen. If I'm closing government, I listen to the entire prime minister from the 1st to the 7th minute. I don't write anything. Like I write what they're saying, but not my case, right? And then when the leader of the opposition starts, I already choose what our extension is going to be, and then I have 3 more speeches to run the entire thing, to write it down on paper. Now, what I tell my partner is that they should be listening to the DPM in case the DPM fills these arguments or adds something new or runs a completely different argument, in which case I'm going to modify my papers. But I usually don't listen to the DPM because I want to make sure I have my things on paper ready when I need to go out. And this is the same for closing opposition. I always listen to the entire leader of the opposition. I don't listen to the DLO. I let my partner listen to the DLO and then tell me, when people are switching, somebody's coming up, somebody's sitting down. I ask them, did they feel anything? Was this speech important? Did they run another argument? What did they say? And then they tell me, look, modify this a bit, or you know what, this wasn't important. I'll respond to this, just run the case. And that's how I generally do it. The reason I never run my case in prep time when I'm closing is obviously I don't know what opening is going to be running. Sometimes I used to do this previously, and then you have this sunk cost fallacy where you feel like, oh, I've written so much, it will be a shame if I just wasted it all and didn't run it. And then you run the same case or a very similar case. The only time when I run my entire case in prep as a first speaker is when I'm sure that I have something so incredibly out of the box that I'm like a 99.9% sure opening is not going to come up with. In that case, I spend the entire prep time on running this one argument, but then I spend more time into thinking, what are they likely to what is likely going to be the mistake here, what should I feel, weighing all those things in that prep time. So this is how I generally organize my prep when I'm back half. Then when I start my speech as a back half speaker, first backup speaker, I always make sure that the judge understands what I bring to the table and what our extension was. You can have the best whip speaker ever. If you didn't sell this argument to the panel, you're done. I mean, that's it, right? So you have to make sure that they get this extension and they get how this extension weighs with other things. You can either do it by, directly weighing, or just making sure that the level of proof that you have is enough to beat the opening team, whatever is the strategy in a particular case, but you need to make sure that you've solved this argument completely. So I generally have a bigger portion of time to spend on explaining why we beat opening half and why this our extension matters more than their whatever their thing is. Another important thing when it comes to first speakers is how you organize your papers. Now, I know that there are many different ways in which people organize their papers. Sure, there's no particular response, I guess. What I do is I write a lot. I really stop caring about the environment when it's debating. I write a lot. I write big letters. Only my opening statement is like one paper, and what I do is I just make like a little book from it. So I write on white paper. I put it away. I write on the other paper. I put it on top of that previous paper, and then I just turn the whole thing and have like a book which I basically read in front of the judge. I know that people have different styles. Some people just put all of those on the table. I genuinely have no idea how they manage not to completely confuse themselves with which paper they're supposed to read at which time. Now, I guess this is different for different people, so fair enough. But I always put it as like a little book, and I just read it in front of the judge. I always try to write the best I can, because these papers are not only for me, but my partner is also going to sometimes maybe need to read some of them, especially if I'm not sure if I ran everything correctly. The good thing is that I have a paper with the analysis, and I just hand it to them and say, look, can you read this? Can you run this for me, please, for whatever reason? So I always try to focus on my papers and how good my papers are and how good they look. I think this is very important. At the end of that back half first speech, I also end it quite strongly. So I always end it with either another quote or another weighing with top half. Now, this obviously depends what you're running and how good top half was. Sometimes you don't even need to weigh when you obviously beat top half, right? So you can spend time on other things. But when it's pretty close, I try to be so I don't let my whip speaker do all the weighing, all the because now the situation is different. They don't have only one team to respond to, but 3 teams, and they also have to weigh, right? So always make sure that my extension is as clear as possible, and that they get how I beat my my top half teams, and why this extension generally matters. My speech structure from back half is pretty similar to top half, I would generally say. So also start with strong opening. This is very important from back half. Then I tell them what our extension is going to be. And then the only different thing is when I run my arguments at the end, after that comparative is in, I also try to repeat why this argument beats top half, why this argument matters more. So also have this additional part of this argumentation there that I try to make sure. Now, I know I have another speaker that is going to cover this for me, but I don't want to leave it all in their hands. I feel like you should also have this weighing. You should also sell this extension. And then when the judge gets from the very MO or MG speech that you had something novel and that you possibly beat top half, then it's easy for your whip to extend on this further and to beat other teams as well. Another thing that I generally try to do as a first speaker in debating from whichever position is I've listened to a lot of debates in order to catch the debating lingo. Even though some of these sentences or words are a bit cringe, I guess. They will help you massively, because people who are judging know what they mean. They're looking for them, and you won't be wasting too much time. This is especially if you're an ESL speaker like myself. So let's try to remember what those words that I've never heard before mean, and I use them constantly in debating, right? Even if they're not like at the right place, judges love to hear them, so you have a better shot there. But strategically speaking, as a back half speaker, I always try to focus on which team is the most important team to beat, and then I kind of structure my speech towards that, either by filling my analysis so that it sounds like it's going directly against them, or by having direct responses or weighing against them, all those sorts of things, right? And the additional thing when you are a back halfer speaker is I try to be how do you say this, fair with the judge. So I never try to lie what their extension is. And for example, if I'm only having like a mechanistical vertical extension, I always try to say directly, look, I know the top half ran this, but we're going to do it better because of this, and this reason. This way, you're not trying to fool them, because otherwise judges are like, I heard this. You're trying to make try to make them look like a fool, like that they didn't talk about this. You're open with them and you're telling them directly what your extension is going to be like, and where you're filling the top half, instead of lying and trying to manipulate that, we've never heard this argument before. So, I run mechanistical extensions loads of times. I find it very funny because lots of people on top half just forget to analyze important things. So what I do while their speeches are while they're giving their speech, I try to play a judge. So I generally try to catch where the holes in that speech are. And if I was judging that debate, what would be problematic for me? Is it the comparatives? Is it the lack of analysis? Is it some logical gaps? And then I try to make my mechanistical vertical extension fill all of these holes. And then while I'm giving the speech, I always make sure that the judge gets what exactly I'm trying to fill and why this matters to the entire debate. But the structure is generally the same. So I also go opening statement. I have two arguments, which are this argument and this argument, starting with the first argument, which has a statement. Then it has a couple of layers of analysis. Reason number one is this. Reason number two is this. All those sorts of things, then the impacts, and then the comparatives, and then additionally the weighings there. Sometimes the important reason why you listen to your top half is some of the mechanisms they use for some arguments are the same mechanisms you will be using for your arguments. Even though they're completely different arguments, some mechanisms might be the same. So what I generally do is I listen to those mechanisms and try to either not use them in my arguments, even though the argument is different. If mechanisms are similar, people might be, feel like this is a similar argument as well. So I always try to either use other mechanisms or to spin the mechanisms that I have so they don't sound similar to my top half, and, use the usual trick, which is if you have similar sounding mechanisms, just divide them a bit, and it, does the magic. That's generally it from closing government. Feel free to ask any question that you have about anything. I'm at your disposal. Yes, hi.
Yeah, so for novice debaters like me, coming up with multiple arguments or top half seems to be like really hard and daunting. Sometimes emotions shallow or weighted against you, all of these things. Other than case fighting, like what strategies and drills did you use to kind of like stimulate case generation and analysis, if any?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question, right? I mean, how to find more. I feel like finding a big amount of arguments is actually harder on back half because you have to have new things. The way I did it is, apart from case filing, is I just listened to a lot of debates. This is just me being here for a very long time. I struggled a lot in the beginning to find arguments, but then after a while, I just realized what kind of stocky arguments you can run in different motions. And when the motion comes up nowadays, especially from top half, I have like 2 or 3 ideas pop into my head the very minute the motion is out. This is basically just me being there for a very, very long time. And, realistically, loads of arguments were mentioned previously in other debates, either because debates are repetitive or, because you can use different arguments in different debates, same arguments in different debates as well. So, this is also when you become, when you're in debating for a longer time, you realize what kind of burdens you need to fulfill from a certain position. And when you realize these burdens, this also gives you more arguments. So for example, in each debate, you need to provide reasons why something is going to work effectively. So my first argument is always why something is effective, right? For example, this is something I usually missed a lot at the beginning of my career. And I noticed that back half teams only then analyze why something is effective and then beat me by this. So I always, when there's a policy motion, I always run effectiveness. When there's like a movements motion, for example, some stocky arguments are always like, how are people going to feel like? They have more buy-in. How are members of the movement going to feel like? Some of these arguments just are there in all of those types of motions. So unfortunately, I cannot give you like a direct response, which is, oh, this is the best reason to come up with 7 arguments each time. It's more like experience just gives you more arguments. And unfortunately, this is how debating works. The reason why good debaters are good is usually because they're here for a very, very long time and they just know what to run. So have to be, I guess, think outside of the box to beat them. So by experience, I got most of these. And the second thing is I case filed some of the things which I'm weak at, which is econ, IR as well. So unfortunately, I cannot give you like a direct response, but just listen to loads of debates, try to track arguments, and after a while, we'll see that they actually repeat.
Yeah,
I have.
thanks.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. Yeah, whoever, guys.
I think I raised my hand first. So yeah, Đorđe, my question is the following. Sometimes my opening team is really, really great. They really have a strong analysis. I just want to have an extension in order to not get a 4th and sometimes like get a 2nd. Then I run a very short extension, and what the judge says as a feedback is like, you should have done more legwork in order to explain why your different material is. But sometimes the judges grasp it. They know I have a new material, although very short, but I should have explained more why this is something exclusive and not necessarily like something that is stronger, because I don't want to prove that necessarily. What do you do to really highlight why something is new and why this is so relevant, although very short sometimes?
I mean, there are different mechanisms to do this, right? Either you pretend that this argument focuses on a larger group of people are a more vulnerable group of people. There's stocky, moments that people use in debating to try to lie to a judge that something is more important. But generally speaking, when it happens, when it happens that my top half team is objectively better than I am and has run certain arguments, I'm also very open to losing to them, and I just generally focus more on other 2 teams. I weigh against them, I respond to them a lot, and I just leave the say opening government as it is. I sometimes am even more like, depends on my mood, I guess, but sometimes I just like, oh look, opening government wins, but I'm going to prove why we're second. We're going to give you 1 argument which is important, not as important I guess, but important, and then let's talk about both of those oppositions. In this case, I only deprioritize my analysis for more responses to both teams on that other bench or whatever these two teams are. When you're in out rounds as well, you can be second easily, no worries. So you just need to make sure that you've beaten the other 2 teams, both with your mechanisms, which you try to flip on your side, and with each mechanism that you run, that 1 argument that you have, you try to ask the question why these mechanisms go against their case as well. You try to flip, use all of those metrics, and sometimes it's fine to lose if the team in opening is so much better than you and you feel like there's no way to beat them. If you feel there's a slight chance, I always go for the standard ones, which is, oh, this argument is more important because it focuses on this group which is more vulnerable, or it focuses on a larger amount of people, or it focuses on countries that we want to help more. So these kinds of sorts of regular things that people use. Sometimes that will work. Most times it won't if the top half team was very good, but that's fine. I generally find debating, at least in the last 5 or 6 years, to be like top half weighted in general, unfortunately. This is what statistics also tell you, I guess. So I will focus on being second, especially in out rounds. I don't care at all. If it's the final, I will only if I feel like they cover the basics very, very well, I'll just try to think of something out of the box and, you know, either be a fourth or a first. It doesn't really matter. So I'll just try, but I'll think for like 30 minutes to come up with something that is, you know, might pass. Yeah. Hannah, hi.
Yeah, so the first question, I actually have two. So hypothetically, if I am there alone and I have an idea come up to my mind during the PM speech that I feel good about for an argument, do you think that I should try to run it or not?
Yes, definitely. If you feel like you, I mean, depends on the situation, right? If running this argument is going to make you lose time so that you don't run something else that you find important, or you know, you don't feel like you have the time to run it well, then no, right? But if you feel like you can run it well, you have enough time, then yes. So it really depends on the situation. Sometimes what people will do is they come up with a great argument, you know, during their speech or at the very end of the previous speech, and they'll run this argument badly, and then closing half will steal it and just explain it better. So try to not open yourself up to this possibility as well. So this is also, I guess, important. If you feel like you can run it well, so that, you know, the closing cannot steal it and you won't jeopardize the entirety of your case, definitely go for it. But I guess it's very situational. That's the response there. So it depends what you're trying to get at. But, you know, from my experience, most of the good arguments will come up during prep, especially if you're a top half. Sometimes, you know, you come up with something that you missed, and then I definitely go for it. Yeah, so it depends, but I would say mostly yes. What was the second question?
Yeah, okay. And the second question, how do you specifically introduce comparative? Do you like answer some specific questions when explaining it?
Sorry, the comparative?
Yeah, how do you, like, when doing your argument, do you just go like, oh, this is the comparative, or do you do something else? Do you explain some other things while at it?
No, so when I run a comparative, I try to run the comparative for each. So people will do different things, right? You can either run a general comparative at the end of your speech and say why the entirety of your case is comparative, and then give reasons for this. So this changes this debate in this 3 particular ways, as opposed to status quo, in which you cannot have this change or whatever. Or people will run the comparative after each argument, and some people even run comparative for each mechanism. So for example, they'll say, this particular mechanisms gives you buy-in into this movement, while on a comparative, you cannot get buy-in because of this. This particular mechanisms will give you more money for the movement, while on a comparative, you cannot get money because of this problem. So really depends on the debate. What I do is I generally run my comparatives after each argument. So my argument is, for example, the movement for X, Y, Z will get a bigger buy-in, which is important for this reason. I give a couple of reasons why you cannot get that buy-in in the status quo without this change that the motion gets you. So this is very important. I generally feel like people have missed loads of comparatives in the last couple of years. I guess you don't learn about comparatives as much anymore. But I mean, for a judge, it's very hard to, even if your argument proves that X will happen, if I don't know why the X cannot happen without the motion, I generally have no idea how the argument changes anything. So you need to explain not only that the change is going to happen and the change is good, but rather why the change cannot happen otherwise. Where you position strategically your comparative is up to you. People will either do it at the end of at the beginning of the, sorry, at the end of the entire case, or at the end of the particular argument. I do it that way. So each argument that I run, I always have a strong comparative and make sure to, you know, I always basically use the words, here is the comparative to this particular argument. Our claim was that this gives you money, for example, to vulnerable groups, while on a comparative, they cannot get money in the status quo because of this reason, this reason, this reason. So also analyze why the comparative works and why you cannot have this change without the motion happening. And I feel like this is incredibly important. People are missing this a lot nowadays for some reason. So they'll tell you that something gives you an incredibly important change. They'll explain this perfectly, but I have no idea other than intuitive ideas, why the change cannot happen otherwise, which is incredibly important. So always focus on this at the end of each argument, and I'm very vocal about it. So I say, this is the comparative to this argument. You cannot have this because of these 2 reasons or 3 reasons or whatever. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. We have other questions as well. Guys, Tristy?
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Lovely. So my question is more, when I'm an OG and I'm going first, I have seen that there's a tendency where I don't perform as well on PM compared to any of the other first speeches. And I think part of the reason is because I haven't heard a case from the other side. And so do you have any suggestions for like how to either not like preemptively respond to op, but like building your case in a way that is more comprehensive and covers more ground when you are prepping from OG?
I mean, it seems like a couple of questions there, right? I always just try to think of what the other side is going to run. What is the most logical argument op is going to run? What would I be running as an opening opposition? That this first idea that comes to mind, and then I try to make sure that I input the responses to this into my mechanisms as well. If I'm not responding directly, I try to make my mechanism stronger by trying to predict what the likely op argument is going to be, and then I cannot really explain this if I don't have an example in front of me, right? So this is a bit abstract, I guess. But what I do is I try to make my, I realize what the potential responses to my case might be, and then I see how I try to preempt these responses in my mechanism. So, and I'm also vocal about this. So I say, my first mechanism to this argument is this thing. Now, opposition might say this to that mechanism, but here is a response why this doesn't work. So I think my argument becomes, so my mechanisms and my argument respond to this, they're going to try to defend themselves from this argument. I always try to think about what is the likely response or what is the likely argument on that side, and try to input this when I'm making my own mechanisms as well. So, you know, trying to preemptively make them stronger to, you know, and more sustainable to responses, or directly saying they will respond this to this argument, but do not fool yourself. This is not a response that is going to work. And the reason is this mechanism stands because of this reason, this reason. So that is in general how as an OG, I generally feel like OG is a bit of suboptimal position, because you really only have one responsive speech. You're the one opening the debate. There's many different obstacles. So I really try to have at least one very strong argument, you know, that is responsive to everything else in the debate from the you know, op bench, for example. So I try to input the mechanism, you know, their responses and their arguments into my mechanisms as well. So, you know, I use different techniques, I guess. It's kind of hard to give you a straight response when you don't have a direct example, but in general, this is how I would how I approach opening government.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I had a question off of what you just said as well. So recently, there have been some debates that I've noticed where the closing teams, I don't want to say they run like wacko new stuff, but like the extensions that they're running probably focus on an external actor, which might not have been your initial idea when you were, you know, developing your OG. So if I'm getting one very strong argument on OG, do you have any suggestions on coming up with weighing mechanisms against some novel things that closings might run?
I mean, when you're opening, you don't really have a lot of time to respond to you know, to closing. They'll give you like one POI or two the most. So usually the wacky news things don't work for multiple reasons, right? I mean, the reason why you didn't come up with it probably means that that there's an internal problem with this. So, you know, I guess you just try to call out what the problem was, and the reason that it's wacky and new and interesting probably means there's some internal error there. You know, and what I do, I mean, there's not much you can do from OG against CO that has a smart extension, I guess. But I ask for at least 2 POIs, and I try to you know, respond to this or make it sound as whack as possible, or you know, as wow as possible to make the judge. So the thing is, the burden for a judge to buy that argument against a straightforward argument from your side is huge, right? Because they have to both buy the whack stuff and also to buy that they beat you, who ran just regular stuff. So just try to weigh this with you, with your case all the time. Say in POI, say this is whack, they cannot prove this, but even if they can prove this, our argument is more comprehensive, works for more people, so do not discard it, or you know, try to play in this. But if they have something that is so incredibly new and smart, I guess they'll win the debate. There's not much you can do. At one point, you just have to accept, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Guys, whoever would like to unmute themselves has the upper hand.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, my question is about preparation. Me and my debate partners are EFL and ESL and struggling with English, so we are always, you know, running out of my prep time. My question is, what is your recommendation for the use of 15 minutes preparation, especially when we're opening half, like coming up with our cases, burdens, opponents one, and time for sharing ideas or writing paper independently? This is my question.
Yeah, okay. So what I do is before the motion is announced, I try to look into other teams and, you know, strategically prioritize what we're going to run. So I don't know the motion, but I know that CG is, for example, the strongest team. So that is to say, I will focus on having more arguments so that I can struggle with extension. This I do before the motion is out. When the motion is out, this is what I usually do. We agree that the first 2 minutes, we will not be speaking at all to each other. So everybody just thinks about the motion and arguments for themselves. You basically time yourself, and when 2 minutes is up, you say, okay, 2 minutes is up, what do you have? And then they tell you what arguments they came up with, then you tell them what arguments you came up with. In the first 3 minutes, you should have like 3 or 4 ideas from both of you that you independently came up with. And then you have like 2 additional minutes, I guess, or like 1 minute, depending on the situation, to decide which arguments you're going to run. So you have like 4 arguments. I would say don't run all 4 of them, discard 1 at least. And then what you also try to do in that time is prioritize. So you say, we'll be running these 3 arguments from opening government. Which ones do you think should go before others? So which one should go first, which one should go second, etc. When this is done, depending on your ability, I guess, you either try to run those arguments on paper by yourself, or you will run them by yourself, while your partner will be thinking about responses, preemptives, frames, you know, all these sorts of things that will happen in a debate. But if you don't have as much experience, I recommend you both working on analyzing arguments. Then you do this for all arguments that you're going to run until like 13th or 14th minute, I guess. And then after this is done, even if you don't have everything on paper ready, I would always prioritize saying, stop, I have 60 seconds to run through my papers. I need to make sure that at least these 2 first arguments I'm going to develop well, and, you know, give out a comprehensive speech there. So this is how I prioritize, this is how I organize my prep time every single time. On top half. On bottom half, I spent the entire 15 minutes just talking about ideas for arguments, which is something I've mentioned previously. But on top half, this is how I always do this. So first 2 minutes are, you know, everybody thinks for themselves. There's no talking one to another. After this, we say, enough. What do you have? Here's what I have. And then we decide which arguments we're going to run, in which order are we going to run them, and then you decide whether you are going to run them on paper by yourself or with the help of a partner. Anyways, you just spend like 10 minutes running arguments. Now, obviously, when you're running them together, you're going to be more likely to come up with all the burdens and not miss anything. With more experience, you're going to be able to do this alone as well. But for the time being, I guess, when you run the arguments on your papers, when you write them down, both of you are trying to come up with reasons to something, and then also try to see whether you're feeling all the burdens. What is the possible response? Are you missing something? Also, while reading the arguments afterwards, you're possibly going to come up to this conclusion yourself. So you're going to see, oh, I missed something here. This is a very important link, or something is illogical. Let me elaborate this further before I start my speech. So this is how I always run my prep time. And I always save this last minute or two, preferably free, to go through all my papers. I also use the introduction time, all of this time to read my papers, to make sure that I can run this speech even without the papers. Now, papers are here to help you, obviously, but you should know your speech to the extent to which you can almost run it as perfectly without the papers present. So that is how I usually function during my prep time. When there's two of you, you're going to notice more burdens. When there's only one of you, you might miss something. But unfortunately, at the very beginning, you're going to be missing some burdens as well. That's natural. After a while, you're going to realize which burdens should be met, and then you're going to get progressively better. That's how I organize my prep time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we have another question. Yeah.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah. Hi.
Yep. So whenever I'm going as a prime minister, sometimes the issue I struggle with is not having a control over my word economy, where I tend to overanalyze things and it ends up reaching to the same conclusion, which also kills off my time, making it hard for me to reshuffle and prioritize other things. What do you think I should do to sort of improve on the word economy and just be better at time management?
That's a good question. I sometimes also struggle with time management as well. Somewhat my golden rule is if I have three arguments that I wish to run, argument number one needs to end at 3 minutes. Argument number two needs to end at like 5:50, and then have like a minute and a half to run the third argument, which I find to be the least important, at least somewhat, right? This is my general rule. So what I do is I always try to have not like 11 reasons for anything. The thing is, when you have like 3 reasons for each argument, with impacts and comparatives, after some practice, of course, it should come down to first argument is ending at about 3 minutes. Second argument is ending at about 5:30, and the last argument is ending at about 7:15. Now, this is the thing of practice in general. So the more you practice, the more debates you do, you'll be better at time management. To begin with, don't try to. So I think reading through your arguments before your speech also helps here as well, right? Because you're gonna see which of the mechanisms are repetitive, which of the things are explained enough. But whenever you feel like during your speech you're kind of repeating yourself, or the judge isn't necessarily writing, or you're confusing yourself with talking about one particular thing over and over again, just move on. Force yourself to move on. There are a couple of exercises I used to do in order to not waste too much time. So what I used to do is I used to do this previously when I was a novice. So I used to have a speech and like 3 arguments in 7 minutes. Then I would try to run the exact same speech in 6 minutes. Then I would try to run the exact same speech in 5 minutes. So I always cut a minute of my time each and every time. And then after a while, you become better at speaking words that you want to speak. Cutting down on unnecessary things. So I think this is a great exercise that you can use. So just find the motion, give yourself like 15-20 minutes, as much as you want. Try to run 3 arguments in 7, or 2 arguments in 7 minutes, then 6 minutes, then 5 minutes. All these sorts of things, right? And then this is going to teach you how to become more effective, because when you have 5 minutes instead of 7, you're going to cut the unimportant details and focus on the more important ones. This is the exercise I used to give myself, and it helped a lot with my time management, which I was also struggling with at the beginning. Hope this helps.
Yep, that answers the question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions, guys?
Yeah, I have a question following that one. More so when I'm on closing, but even in opening as well. I kind of struggling spending a lot of time with my framing. Like even if it's intuitively like the right framing to give, I just kind of have the tendency to spend excessive amounts of time on it. So I guess my question is how to know when you frame something enough, like how to frame it efficiently.
In general, it depends on the frame, depends what you're trying to prove. What I do is if I have a framing, it should be like a 2-sentence framing with the explanation afterwards why this framing matters, as opposed to running a frame forever without explaining what this framing does to the debate. So I generally find it more important to explain to a judge what you're trying to achieve with a particular frame rather than just give them a frame they don't get. My idea is, I mean, none of these rules are strict, right? But I tend to start my arguments after 1.5 minutes tops, with all the introductions, responses, and framing. If you feel like 1 minute 30 has passed and you did not start with your arguments, you're doing something wrong, in my opinion. Your job as the first speaker is to give arguments to the judge. Your partner can run frames and responses. Don't waste too much time on it. So I would say both focus, like literally look at your clock. If it says 1:30, start with your argument ASAP, even if you don't feel like you've run all the frames that you wanted or perfectly or whatever. Try to start with your arguments. The additional thing is focus more on what the framing does to debate rather than here's a framing I like, and so should you. This is how I generally approach these things. But I mean, just keep in mind that the judge is not going to be caring that much about framings anyway, especially from the top prime minister. They're looking for your arguments. So just focus on that, I guess. And, you know, sometimes just cut your framing entirely if this is going to improve your analysis.
Just to follow up on that, you talked briefly about giving framings, running framings from second. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? Because I think to me, giving framing has always been something that I interpret as a first speaker thing. How would a second speaker go about?
Second, you mean like giving framings from a second speaker? From like
yeah,
a
like
whip?
running frames, like you talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly speaking, I'm not like good at second speeches. So some other people are better at responding to this question. Your partner has all the right to run any framings that you wanted to run. Now, obviously speaking, it's better if framings are done in a PM or an LO speech. I agree. But if you don't have the time, they can run any frame that you want, you know, and explain how that frame fits into the analysis that you gave. So what they'll do is they say, okay, here's a frame that changes this debate, and here's why my partner's speech matches this frame and therefore matters the most in this debate. This is what people have missed. Here's the particular frame you want to run, and here's how this, you know, first speech, you know, is positioned well within this particular frame, as opposed to other teams which are not positioned well within a particular frame. So this is what my partners usually do. I'm not an expert here, to be quite honest with you. But what they do is they just say, this is where the debate happens the most. This is the framing that we want to run. And here's how our extension or our analysis on our arguments, whatever position you're on, you're at, work within this framework. And here's why other teams fail to respond to this framework as well. So this is what people will do. But I guess there are other, you know, people who will respond to this question a bit better than me.
No, it was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? I'm gonna presume that's a no. I mean, Junita is here, I believe. And Junita, when you're starting?
Yes.
Have I gone over my time? Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. I'm gonna leave you guys then. If anybody has any additional questions, you can find me on social media as well. So just send me a message and I'll respond to whatever question you might have. But I'm leaving the mic to to Juanita, who's going to talk about something else, something more important, I guess. Bye, everyone. Thank